Helen Kurtz is the Chief Marketing Officer at The Wine Group, a parent company with dozens of brands that sells over 50 million cases of wine a year. She reports directly to the CEO. This is her third C-suite role at a CPG company. She spent the majority of her early career at General Mills, where she started as an associate marketing manager and worked her way up to multiple VP roles, including managing a $1 billion product portfolio. Helen, thank you so much for hosting us at your office today and talking with us.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here with you, Julianne.
So can you tell us about how you started your career?
So my career started really early. I was always really hungry to be earning money and out there hustling. I was thinking a lot of what I learned as a babysitter and having a paper route and scooping ice cream and working for a crazy rich couple that needed me to sort of organize their lives. So that's how it started, was all those little jobs that I did in my hometown of Lexington, Massachusetts. And then after college, I got a job in finance, really through a friend who had a father who was looking for someone who could step in for someone on maternity leave. So this will be a theme for me, is that I made a lot of my ins or ability to have a job through connections and through relationship and through impressing people with just sort of my humanity. So anyway, I started in finance and then I went to Dartmouth grad school at Tuck. And as you said, I went to General Mills, spent 20 years there, had an incredible experience and career, got to work on so many different brands. And then from there, I've moved on. We can talk more about that, but I've been in California for 8 years and I've had 3 CMO roles since.
I would be interested to know where you feel like some of the biggest inflection points of your life and your career were that led you to where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, I think so often the inflection points are negative in the moment. And so I think about 2. One was, as I said, I started in finance and my aha was, gosh, I'm not really like suited for this. I think the people who really thrived, it was a money management firm and it was investment. My boss was so good at it, like he literally thought in numbers. You know, I would think of things like it was sort of like a flower name, and he would be like it had 7 letters. And so it's like that numerical bias was something that I sort of early on realized, like I can do math, but like that's not what drives me. And when I really thought about what I was passionate about, it was more like I was like obsessed with grocery shopping and like new products and thinking about consumers. And so that was a big inflection point, was thinking like, okay, I don't want to do finance. I need to make a career shift. I need to think about how do I do that? And that's business school is an enabler for that. And then the second big inflection was, as I said, I was at General Mills. I was a vice president on a really big, important brand, Yoplait, and I got laid off. And that was so deeply humbling and brutal because I just like, I loved that company so much. It was my favorite thing. My whole social group and identity was very tied up in it. Sad about it, but looking back, you always realize like, well, both of those hard moments led to really great, wonderful moments. And I'm so glad that that I've gotten here, and I wouldn't have without both of those scenarios. So yeah, it's fun to reflect because you do realize things work out somehow. I'm not really one to say like things work for a reason or, it's all fate and things like that. But I think if you have a fair bit of luck and a lot of grit and nerve and drive, like it's going to work out some kind of way that will be good in the end.
As difficult as it would be to be laid off, where you feel like you are in a position where you know all of your key contacts that you need to be successful in the role, you've built the team that you can rely on, to then have that swept out, that you also had so much confidence in yourself and the projects that you'd nailed, that you were going to go on and be able to get another great position at a great company.
I never want to sugarcoat it because in the moment you do question yourself and you do, think it's hard to see beyond the moment that you're in. And happily, I was able to pull together all those stories and accomplishments. And, one of my pieces of advice of advice for people is kind of keep a record of what you're doing, whether it's in the form of a resume or not. But your resume will be fantastic if every year you write down what your accomplishments were and are very specific about them, because it turns out after a 20-year career, like, you have a lot to talk about. And I really did, with distance, see how much I was able to contribute. So it was great to be kicked out in the end, because I wouldn't be thriving in the same way. All the gifts that you have from one company are sort of seen in great effect in another company, right? Whereas I wouldn't have had that chance. So I really do look back with gratitude, but in the moment, let me not be Pollyanna about it. It was terrible. It was hard. It was like pull myself off the rug kind of moment.
Right. Interesting that one of your first early full-time roles was in finance, because I'm in finance, and to me that seems the opposite from marketing, because marketing is so creative and you have to have like a feeling for something. There's no formula for marketing. Did you have a dream job as a child, or did you have a kind of 10-year path when you were graduating from college that this is what I wanted to do? Or did you just go out to the job world and see what opportunities there were for you?
Yeah, I didn't have a 10-year path, and I was pretty clueless about marketing as a function. In fact, I like always to talk to people about CPG, we call it consumer product goods, and try and help people see that this is a career path and what it is, because it was very blurry to me and I didn't know that that was a thing, even though, I have two older siblings who are MBAs. I didn't know that I wanted to do marketing. I wanted to be, when I was growing up, an actress, so that is of no help at all. And that was quickly, that bubble was burst, so that wasn't useful. But I might push back on the finance versus marketing thing, because I think when you really boil down marketing and what you need to be good at, a lot of it is team management and leadership and analytics that I learned at Tuck and through finance. So there is a fair amount of sort of like riskiness about marketing and creativity, but a lot of what you're doing is marshaling that out of other people and making sure your agencies feel empowered and that you're really crystallizing ideas into a clear brief and a strategy that can be followed, because it's rare that the marketer is actually mixing up the grapes and making the wine or shooting the commercial, right? Like, it's really about marketing. We always talk about is the hub of the wheel. It's about being someone who can best leverage other functions. And so that leadership, that ability to have empathy and EQ and get the best out of a brand and a team is really the secret sauce.
You mentioned that finance is not so different from marketing, because marketing is actually very analytics driven. I would imagine actually that a bad marketer is a person who thinks that they understand the consumer because they just think they are the consumer, and whatever their gut feeling is what all of their customers are feeling. But actually, the best marketer will go out and do research to understand what these different pockets and personalities and perceptions are from the individuals that are buying their product.
That's certainly been true for me. And I have a very personal story about that, because I was the CMO at Foster Farms, which, if you're on the East Coast, is sort of like Purdue Poultry, but on the West Coast, it's the number one in poultry on the West Coast. And I was vegetarian. And so I worked on chicken, and I made the exception and ate our products, but it wasn't something that I was really close to. And then where I sit now as CMO of a wine company, I'm not a really big drinker. I do drink as part of my job, but it's not something that's like intuitive to me. Whereas I was a leader on Yoplait, which was, a very strong yogurt brand, and I was a huge yogurt eater. And this is great. Like, I have so much understanding of the category and so much passion. And to your point, you're almost not as good, because it's hard not to let your own biases come in. Whereas that discipline of really always thinking of your consumer as not yourself and really studying them and their needs and not projecting your N of one has been useful in so many ways. So it's not traditional to work on something on which you are not a deep user and passionate about. But again, my passion comes from all those other things I talk about like the brand and the team and leading growth, things like that. And I think the lesson I try to tell people too is like, you don't have to be a hobbyist in the thing on which you work to be successful in it.
Let's rewind it back a little and think back to college days. I think we're at a really interesting point right now. You know, you and I were both very fortunate to have wonderful educations, formal educations, but there's quite a few people who've been very successful without finishing even a bachelor's degree. And there's quite a bit of debate based on the student debt that we have in the country of, is every degree really worth it? Is it always a good idea to go get a 4-year degree that maybe costs $40,000 or more a year? When you were making your decision to go to college, undergrad, and when you went back for your MBA, what were the considerations that you had in deciding where to go to school?
So I ended up at Pomona College, which is a small liberal arts college in California. And I was coming from a suburb in Boston. And I found it through one of my jobs. My boss's daughter went there, and it fit all the things I was looking for: small liberal arts and really that sort of intimacy and ability to shine in a small setting. I have a experience that my parents both, my dad was a professor of English and did not get tenure and became a computer consultant. And so he did a total 180. And my mom was a English teacher, high school teacher, and she became a social worker. So I had really good models of it's okay to switch your career at 40. And so I guess I didn't feel at all the same pressure that I see, you know, in my children and their peers today, which is you have to know what you're going to do at the age of 16. That's just ludicrous to me. I always knew I was going to go to a sort of liberal arts college. As I said, my father had taught at one, and it was just sort of part of the ethos of being a Kurtz. And I just picked the best one that I could find and was very lucky that it ended up being such a terrific fit and that its equity has sort of risen as I left. But I feel so lucky to have had that experience. And then I felt the same way about Tuck at Dartmouth. I wanted that same small environment in which I really find I learn the best and can stand out. And it was a great chance for me to go back east and be part of a community that was so fantastic. I didn't know at the time how incredible the alumni network and what a huge part that would become of my story. I should have known that, but that truly did end up being a big part of the good decision I made.
Could you tell us about what class you took in college that you think was the most helpful for your career?
My favorite class was a Shakespeare class that I took. And in the class, the big assignment was to put on an act of Twelfth Night. And to do that, of course, you have to really understand the text, both in acting in it and directing it and, you know, managing this like gaggle of 6 people or something in my group. And I think it was an early training for business school where you are trying to get to a great product, leveraging other folks that are maybe not as committed or have the same ideas as you. So it was sort of my first real study group on which rested a big part of our grade and like our social dignity, putting out this play. So then just the sort of rigor of analyzing Shakespeare. And I had just an amazing teacher or professor who inspired such commitment and devotion and passion around Shakespeare. So that one really sticks with me. And I think it is a great example of your most influential classes are often not in your major. I was not an English major. And similarly in business school, while I had fantastic marketing classes, I think my accounting and my operations classes were almost more influential in terms of how I lead and the broad view that I have of running a business. So it doesn't have to be exactly tied to your major.
Yeah, that's a great example. I think a lot of college students don't think about the experiences that they could have, particularly around managing a team. And that's one of those things where you can't read a book and get better at it. Like there's some skills where you can study, but things like public speaking, you just have to go out there and get the experience. And certainly one of those is having several individuals, especially if you don't have any kind of formal authority over them, and having this goal that you are trying to gather everyone around and move towards.
And I think that ability to make relationships with my professors, or I worked in the admissions office and got very close with the dean there, that was very seminal. And that ability to see that people above you in a hierarchical sense are still very accessible and people and really generally aren't being asked to things and really appreciate that kind of reach out from students. And so I don't know, that was a big lesson to me about, again, that drumbeat that I'll talk about being a good human, being a nice person, building relationships, and making people senior to you feel at ease and interesting. Not in a manipulative way, the way I just said it made it sound very Machiavellian, but I remember in college, it was some sort of training, and all the students were sitting like on the couches or on the floor, and the dean of admissions came in, and she sort of didn't know what to do, and so I gave her my seat. And I think it made this incredible impression on her, such that she instantly hired me for the job that I was, looking for, et cetera. It's such a small, small moment that sticks with me still about of course that's the right thing to do, but in a huge, there were 100 people in this room, you have to be the one who does it because it's the right thing to do. So anyway, just those moments of connection with faculty and administration trained me for the future. And of course, I had great relationships with students and I had a great curriculum, et cetera. But that life lesson is the one that stuck.
Right. These soft skills are what they call them, right? And I remember as I was working towards getting my second professional role, I could talk about all my hard skills. I can tell you all the impressive things I can do with pivot tables and nested if statements and all of these analytical abilities that I had. But I found it quite difficult to articulate what is it about me that is a soft skill that makes me good in a role. And these are things that are what help people rise as managers, right? Is being able to read the room, is what you said, and to have maybe not empathy, but understanding of what the other person is feeling and how to interact with them. And I think that's going to become even more important and even more of a differentiator for the upcoming generation that has grown up where they have this digital world where they have a lot of relationships, but that is probably robbing their experiences physically in person with people that you're going to have to be successful in a career.
It's so well put. If you're a parent listening, you know that that's the most important thing you can teach your kids is eye contact and listening and asking questions and being a good person who's comfortable in their skin and sort of doesn't have those boundaries about hierarchy. And you want a respect, and that's very important, but you also want this feeling of I'm one of you. Barack Obama talks about you need to feel like you deserve to be in the room and you need to act of course you're sitting at the table. It's not a entitlement thing. It's more just a comfort in your own skin that you feel yeah, this is just, of course I'm interacting in this way. I don't need to be intimidated. You also hit on another theme, Julianne, which is so important, which is it's very hard in interviews to talk about yourself while still being humble because you want your actions to speak and you don't want to have to talk about how you're so full of EQ or you're so good at conversation because that feels counter to the character that you are. But you have to find a way to weave those things in because I think that's what people respond to. And that is generally, again, looking back on my career, that is a differentiator. That is what has led me to success way more than the table stakes of the hard skills or the tactics that you need to have to succeed. What really helps you stand out is that ability to interact and get the most out of a team or cross-functionals or your boss even.
Do you think that it's more of a problem for women to have that sense of feeling like they belong in the room, and particularly acting and feeling assertive when there are other individuals in the room that are above them in the hierarchy?
I'm always really careful about if it's a woman-man thing, and I know you're not suggesting that. I have seen both. I have seen men be really tentative to their detriment. I have seen women be too aggressive to their detriment. And, who am I to say what's too and what's not enough? I think you have to be careful as a woman because maybe more eyes are on you. So yes, I think maybe the default might be more respect, more hierarchical thinking. On the other hand, I think there's been a lot publicized, lean in, a lot of education that sometimes I see women take it too far into a sense of entitlement. And that is a very fine line because you also do need to not be entitled. I guess you just want to sort of earn your way into these things. So what I'm talking about is, again, about like the human interaction. It's less about sort of making sure that your demands are known and things like that. I just think it's a tricky line. And I think we as women have to be careful not to go too far on that spectrum because the truth is you are being evaluated in a different way than men. Maybe it goes back to the EQ thing in that you have to really know where you can push and where you should demand and where you ought to be entitled, and then where it's inappropriate and you haven't earned your stripes yet and you haven't been able to do that. Because I think it is such a murky area and it really does depend so much on the individual. But I guess it is really knowing yourself very well.
Yes, we are striving for equality and equal opportunity, but also need to be aware of the realities. And hasn't been that long since there were much fewer opportunities for women. And maybe a lot of these people are no longer in leadership in the workplace. But I was just looking, it was as recently as like before the 70s, women couldn't open a bank account on their own. And I don't think they were allowed to serve on juries as well. And there's still people who have that perception that a woman's intellectual capacity is not the same level of a man's. And so being aware that that is something that is out there in the world. And as you said, that there's going to be double standards, and just being aware of that as you decide how to present yourself.
Yeah, and I think being careful about not jumping to the conclusion that it's because you're a woman is the other thing. Because sometimes it's like, no, it's because you're very junior and you have not really earned that ability to push back in this way, or you don't understand the full context, or, I think it's a delicate dance. I think, I'm trying to raise my children, a boy and a girl, to have all those same characteristics. And it's just as important for my son to have those quote unquote soft skills or ability to interact in that way as it is for my daughter.
Let's dip into Helen as a person.
Okay, great.
It's Saturday morning, you have no responsibilities, no chores. What do you do?
Well, I loved this question because my Saturday morning is sort of sacred to me, and I do a very big workout, and I row on the ergometer for 10,000 meters, and I lift weights, and I do it all on my driveway, which is blessedly flat, and I have my two dogs out there with me, and the neighbors walk by, and it's just a really nice time. Like, no matter how the week has gone, if I've had time to do all the working out that I want or not, I know that Saturday morning is sort of mine, and my kids know that, and my husband knows that, and my dogs look forward to it. So I really get a lot of that. I just listen to music, or I use the Peloton app on my row, and I have a sheet in my garage on which I've done the hash marks for every meter that I row. And it's a point of pride for me. I have 3 full sheets for every set of weights that I've lifted and meters that I've rowed. And, I've been doing this for 8 years since we moved to California. And it's just a nice thing for me to look back at. And I still, I had a PR last week on my rowing. And so I still try to get better. Again, my son is a rower. I am nowhere near the watts or time that he hits. But for me, I am trying to get better every week versus myself, even if it's by a tenth of a second.
That's incredible. And my next question is going to be what you do to stay healthy. And I love that you weight train. That's so great. And anyone who's done a 10,000 meter row can tell you that it takes grit to
Yeah.
get through that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think to be healthy, really love working out. When I was a senior in high school, I was hit by a drunk driver. I was in a car and my back was broken. And so I was really limited. I was a runner at the time, like running cross country, and I wasn't able to run until business school. Actually, I kind of got the blessing of my doctor. And I think anyone who goes through being told they can't do something, it lights a fire in you to really want to do something. So I don't always have a lot of empathy for people who hate working out. For me, such a privilege, and I see it as a break from everything else I do in my day. So I really love to work out, even though in the moment I might sort of grit my teeth. And then I have to be sort of disciplined about what I eat. I find that I eat the same thing every day, almost every day. So my husband calls me a koala bear because I like to eat the same thing breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But it's almost like I have a formula for what works for me, what like sustains me and makes me feel good.
Something like that happened to you where you're going about your life and someone else is making a bad choice that impacts you so dramatically, maybe to have your back broken. I can imagine a lot of people would respond to that by being very fearful of the world and wanting to become very protective and insular. But there's also this concept of post-traumatic growth where maybe you can say, oh, look at what I've been through and look at what I've survived and thrived and come out from. Was that kind of your experience now looking back?
Absolutely. And I think, we started the interview with like the hard things that shaped who I am. And I think I've often looked back at that experience I had with my broken back, or my first year in business school was really, really hard. And I think I survived that. I can do this. I did a bunch of marathons. That's another big marker for like, if I can do that, I can do anything. I do think having those struggles helps you savor the other times and also lets you look back and say, like, this is nothing compared to that.
Right. Let's talk about your support. So tell us about your family.
Let's see, I have an amazing husband, Mike. He and I met on Match.com in my 30s. And I was thinking about that when we were talking about it's hard to talk about yourself in a humble way because I don't really drink and I worked all the time. So I was like, how practically am I going to meet someone in my 30s? And my really good friend, Jenny, wrote my Match.com profile as only a very good friend could, which was like, saw the best in me, was quite witty about it, and captured me in a way that I couldn't do because it would have felt boastful. But whatever she did a great job because it brought Mike and me together. So I've been married to him for 20 years, and he retired a number of years ago, which is an incredible enabler to me to get to do the job that I need to do and be the person at work and at home that I need to be. And then I have two kids. My son, Henry, is a senior in high school, and my daughter, Stella, is a freshman in high school. And they are incredible people, and I'm so lucky to have them. And then I have a golden doodle and a golden lab.
Wonderful. And there's a concept of a personal board of directors. So these are your people who are mentors or friends, but ones that really have their own wealth of experience and wisdom and also want the best for you and want to see you thrive. Do you have people like that? Do you have a personal board of directors in your life that you go to?
I absolutely do. I think it is such a huge concept, and it is made up of people who don't actually know each other. So, my brother is one, and I have someone from my General Mills days, and I have someone from my business school days, and they all come about things in different ways, but they have always my interest in mind and know me very well and can sort of call me on things that are maybe holding me back that shouldn't be. So I really love that idea of a personal board of directors as challenging, supporting, reminding you of who you are. I think it's a really powerful concept.
What advice do you have for young women who are just starting their career?
I think a lot of it is just trying to hold on to what excites you, but not being rigid about it has to be something that you are exactly qualified for or exactly in the field that you're looking. By which I mean, I never would have thought that I would be in the C-suite of a wine company. I mean, in fact, when they called me, the recruiter, I was like, no, no, you must have me mistaken because I don't drink. Or similarly, of a chicken company, or even when I went to General Mills in the middle of the country, I was like, the Midwest, sort of don't be held back by your preconceptions and try to bring things down to like really their essence. In the case of marketing, it's all the things I talked about. It's about cross-functional and leadership and being a great manager and having an instinct for the consumer and creative, et cetera. And I think the more you can think about your skills versus the specificity of what exact job you want, that can be very helpful and it can open you up to opportunities you might not know were out there.
So, going to your time at General Mills, can you tell us about climbing the corporate ladder? Why do you think you were chosen to get promoted so many times? I mean, you started as an associate marketing manager, and over time you were promoted to become a VP. This is something that people, work their entire lives for, and the organizational pyramid gets smaller as you go up. So, what was it about you that you think helped you get chosen to get promoted?
I was lucky to be part of General Mills in that there was a very clear path in a way that I'm not sure many jobs are today, in that you started as an assistant and then you went to associate and then you got promoted to manager and then senior manager. So it was a very clear track versus the jungle gyms we talk about today where things can meander all over. So that was one thing. I am a very hard worker. I am very thorough. I really care about doing a great job and I am willing to put in the time. And I think that commitment to preparation is a lot of my success. And it's not very sexy and it's hard sometimes because it is about delayed gratification on things and it is about like passing things up. But I think hard work is a really big part of it. And then certainly that connection, that ability to make connections with people and to influence without authority. In marketing, you're the hub of the wheel. And it means, R&D doesn't report to me, finance doesn't report to me, but I've got to be able to get them to help me work on the things I want them to work on versus the other things that they're working on. And so there's a lot of influence through relationships and through inspiration and strategy. It's always hard to put your finger on one thing, but I think that cocktail of how I show up as a person and as a leader and the tenacity to do what it takes to get the job done, I think that gives people a lot of comfort that I'm very reliable, I deliver, I get results, and I'm not bad to be around. Like I'm not a diva. So I think so much of it is that whole cocktail of it's not one thing, right? It's sort of how you are in the whole.
There has been a through line to your career. You've been largely at consumer packaged goods companies and you've been in marketing roles. But can you tell us about what your job search strategy was like when you moved between companies?
When I left General Mills, as I said, I was sort of bereft and at a low ego wise. And someone gave me the advice to just have coffee with or talk with people. And so I, in the way that I do, set a big goal. I was going to meet with as many people as I could. And I met with something like 130 people, just half an hour. I know it was crazy and it wasn't even that much time. And people were so generous between the Tuck network that I had, the General Mills network that I had, friends of friends. I remember a list I made, which was like brainstorming everyone I knew that I wanted to talk to from General Mills and through college and through grad school and through my kids' swimming lessons and through my husband's contacts. That way you really see how big your network is. So that was a big unlock. Of course, the truth is at the level I was looking to be in the C-suite, much of it comes through recruiters. But the way you get to recruiters, because you can't get to all of them, is to get to people who will advocate to you when they hear about a job. So that networking really did pay dividends because someone heard of a job and thought of me and mentioned it to a recruiter. And subsequently, when I left Foster Farms, I went to Calavo, which is a avocado and fresh fruit company. And that job came through someone knowing that I was looking. So similar, it's all about that network.
What have you learned in your personal life or hobbies or as a parent that has benefited your career?
Yeah, I had a poster in my office that I now have in my shoe area for my children, which says, work hard and be nice to people, which I thought as my credo. And I had a moment of reflection when I was packing that poster up that that might have been the wrong credo by which to live at General Mills because I had gotten feedback that I, in some ways, was too nice, which, believe me, is a big deal when you're in Minnesota, which is known for being nice, right? So I needed to be a little more aggressive or assertive. And that perhaps gave me permission to do more of that in my next jobs. I will say I was laid off with a lot of people, and I think a lot of it was just there's only so far you can go in a pyramid, to your point, but you can always take something out of it. And I know that I did that. I think it also goes back to I was able to take the 20 years of learning I had and go to a new company and realize, oh, I have this in me. This is in my DNA. This is in all that I do. And I am differentiated because everyone around me isn't the same as me, didn't come up the same way that I did. And so I could really stand out in a way that was hard to in a place where everyone had been brought up in the same way or groomed in the same way.
Speaking of threats to careers, we are entering the era of AI where certain industries are going to have a lot more vulnerability to automation or a computer doing your job or doing aspects of your job. And I think I can see some of this in marketing roles or advertising or like digital design, graphic design. Can you speak to the opportunities that you see in the workforce now?
I am very comforted by what people say that it is all about learning how to use the tool and not putting your head in the sand and avoiding it, but rather leveraging it for your own success. I it is a huge help. You know, it's very helpful for doing menial things or making your work better or writing things very quickly. And I can see right through it when people try to show me work that has been done by AI because it is missing that humanity. It is missing the je ne sais quoi of good writing or good insight. And so I think being able to navigate it well is going to be the trick. I am quite sure that we will need less of some of the skills that we've all relied on, and hopefully they're the ones that we won't miss. But I do know that there are certain things that I've found, at least to date, that aren't replaceable. And it probably has more to do with some of the things we've been talking about in terms of public speaking and getting an idea across and really connecting dots in a way that is not obvious and having those sparks of innovation or of insight that will stand out more.
I love that. What impresses you on a resume?
On a resume, I am looking for specificity, I think, and results. You can manufacture a lot that's just blah, blah, blah. I want to see that you worked on a hard project and you delivered some results. That's what matters. I think the other thing is a little bit of a stick to itiveness, whether it's not job hopping every year or something that tells me that you stuck it out and were patient. I'll tell you what I care less about than I thought I would is name brand schools. And that is shocking. I'm still very impressed by good colleges, don't get me wrong. Way more open to the experiences someone has had post college or post grad school as being the thing that really shapes them versus were they able to get into that top tier college.
Yes, very good. Getting close to wrapping, there's just a couple questions I have left. Which wine varietal would you recommend for our listeners to try?
I mean, I think that's a very hard thing for me to say. I will tell you what I like best, but I have a very unsophisticated palate. And so for me, whites and a Sauv Blanc is my favorite. I will admit to you that I even like a Moscato, which is a very sweet wine that most wine people would probably, I've lost all credibility with them by saying that. But I think the best thing about wine is there's incredible storytelling and there's nature, there's history, there's everything you can imagine. And it's such a craft. It truly is one of the world's most ancient and incredible crafts that results in this delicious, historic moment you get to have on your palate. And I think it just needs to be what makes you happy, you know? I think it's very interesting. I had a boss who really loved dark chocolate and very savory, umami kind of flavors and always drinks red, whereas I am like a big white chocolate, milk chocolate, so there's no way I can drink a red with any oomph. And so I think there's a real fun to figuring out what's the wine varietal for you. And the great thing about wine is that it's really accessible. It doesn't have to be $100 bottle of wine for you to find your favorite. We're at the wine group. We are very democratized. We have Franzia, which is, 60 cents for a glass if you calculate it out, all the way up to Cooper and Thief and Mayomi and Simi higher end wines. So we just want people to find what they like, and there's no need to be snobs or sort of act like there's one right way.
Well, if I can ask a follow-up to an MBA who's in a marketing role, I know there are brands that you've reinvigorated. Was there one that was particularly interesting when you went in and did the consumer research and you shifted the image of that brand and it caught hold a little deeper?
My favorite brand story to tell and reflect on is Hamburger Helper. And it was a brand that I didn't know. My dad was a gourmet, and so I didn't grow up with sort of packaged goods. But Hamburger Helper is one of those foods that people instantly know what it is and have a very distinct memory of it, either from days in which they were eating in a more economical way or college. And what we did on that brand was really go deep on the consumer. And so my team, my incredible team and I, we went to rodeos and meat raffles. We listened to country music. We really got to know this consumer and got to love them. I remember just thinking, oh, this is such an optimistic, family, patriotic consumer that has a lot to teach us. And understanding that consumer and recognizing that the brand we had inherited, because at General Mills you move every 1 to 2 years, and so the brand as it stood had advertising that showed, a dad in a tie coming home from a long day with a pool in the background. And of course, when we did all this research around it, it was like, that's just not this consumer. That's not depicting it in that way. And the unlock was really showing this consumer, recognizing them, paying tribute to them, and being in the places that they were. That was a huge unlock on the brand. I think another story is just I worked on fruit snacks, Gushers and fruit roll-ups and fruit by the foot, and talk about not putting your views onto the consumer. You're not the consumer. It is generally a kid brand, and really like diving into the kid mindset about wanting freedom within bounds and just the sense of play they have. And so I've gotten to work on these range of incredible brands, and I always think about the people who have come before me and how smart they were and how much hard work they've given, and just making sure you're always staying fresh with the consumer and understanding them.
How do you choose to give back? What social impact causes do you choose to give your time and energy and skills to?
I was so lucky to be asked to be part of the Tuck board of advisors, and I was on a little board at Tuck before that. So a total of 13 years I was on the Tuck board, which was just an incredible privilege that I am sure I got more out of than they of me, because I was allowed to be in this setting amongst peers and those older and younger than I who were just so smart and generous. And it was such a way to reflect on how far we've all come from our actual business school experience and how much we had to contribute from our different vantages. And we got to weigh in on things like admissions or recruiting or things that Tuck seemed to have a genuine need for advice on and that we all had a great perspective on. I also was on 2 theater boards. Theater was a really big part of my life pre-college, and so it was just such a delight to be part of that in my time in Minnesota. And then when I moved to California, after I rolled off of the Tuck board, I started something with my son called Teens Who Tech, which is all about this insight that seniors or older generation are not as intuitive about using technology. And of course, it's such a huge part of their lives and it's such an important part to stay connected as you age. And the insight was, well, gosh, I've got this 16-year-old who knows how to do this in his sleep. Why don't we put them together? And so he and his best friend and I established this nonprofit venture where we go to different senior centers and just help seniors with their phones or with their printer or, very basic things that make such a huge difference. And I think it's not just about technology, it's about so much more. It's about connection, and it's about them telling stories and having someone who's young to interact with and sort of bring life into a pretty static environment. So that's been great. I think you're getting more out of it in every single case than what you're contributing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Helen Kurtz. And I hope that a nice glass of wine is in everyone's future this weekend. Cheers.
Cheers.